So, welcome to yet another episode of On Air with 369 Lumineer and Phoenician Hunter, where we investigate historical occurrences and their validity through impeccable research of Phoenician Hunter. It's on his Substack channel. Welcome, Phoenician Hunter.
Hello, it's good to be back for another one.
It's great to get together again. I'm really excited about this one, and as we discuss, you'll understand why I'm excited. Let's jump straight into it. Today is our episode number 15, and it's titled S.P.Q.R. When did the Roman Empire actually fall? And my big question, which I'm hoping we can extract in today's discussion, is did it actually ever fall? So without further ado, I'm eager to hear what you have to say. So let's go.
Yeah, this is a popular topic, and I know one that interests you quite a bit. So yeah, it's good to finally get round to it. People who follow me on Substack, who've read my articles, know that I'm a big fan of the works of the English historian Edwin Johnson, who wrote in the late 1800s. And it was his idea that spurred me on to investigate this idea about his theory about the falsified chronology. You know, the theory that it's been extended or falsified between, 700 to 1,000 years.
I'm so happy that you've actually jumped out of the blocks with this one, because one thing that really struck me with your article is his famous quote. Again,
The famous,
well, he talks about particularly about the Middle Ages and how he felt that it was an imaginary or non-existent period, which a lot of people could argue against. But he goes on further to say that the modern period beginning soon after the breaking up of the old Roman Empire. So we are therefore not so far removed in time from the Greeks and Romans as our chronological table teaches. So he was probably one of the first ones that actually challenged this idea.
Yeah, he was. Others since then have followed. I don't know if they've followed from his research or have come to the same conclusion independently. And one of those was Anatoly Fomenko, but there were others before him as well. And, with this idea that our history has been falsified and extended for, 1,000 years. And the idea that we're not so far removed from the Greeks and Romans was one that, fascinated me. And there are little sort of hints towards that throughout a lot of, writings and evidence that I've come across, researching other things as well. And even just traveling around southern Italy, and this is evident in the culture and the people, you really sense the Greekness there. Like it hasn't died. There's this sense of we feel Greek. We're somehow ancestors of the Greeks,
Yeah, and that's, obviously they're neighbours in terms of neighbouring countries, but even the city of Naples, which, the ancient Greek was Neapolis, which means new city. You ask anyone in Naples about that and they immediately have a smile on their face and they talk about the history of Naples and their connection to Greek. But I have my personal views on the reason as to why our history and chronology was falsified. But, my views are subjective views. I want to know what you think is the reason that it was falsified.
With just my feeling about how the Greek culture is still sort of, sensed in southern Italy. If you think about it, if the Roman and Greek world ended 1,000 years ago, there wouldn't be any remnants of that culture there. But if it happened recently, a couple of hundred years, then yes, it makes sense that, some street signs in southern Italy are still in Greek.
Yes.
A lot of the dialect still uses Greek words, or that makes sense that it's still evident if it wasn't 1,000 years ago.
That's right. And what people may not know historically is that the further south you move, like in Calabria, for example, there's an area of Calabria where it's a dual dialect of Greek and Italian.
Well,
to this day.
Well, I've known that the dialects have, like I said, a Greek underbelly to it, But for me, that was an indication that it couldn't have died 1,000 years ago because it wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be any remnants of it.
So tell us what you think the primary motive is.
Okay, so according to Johnson, and, I tend to agree with his finding here. The primary motive for falsifying history was to give a sense of antiquity to the newly formed Roman religion, which was Christianity. And there are other researchers who have brought this up. One of them was Jordan Maxwell. Okay, so they
Right.
had
Yeah.
to give it some kind of, it's ancient, and it give it some kind of, purpose and place and authority. If they presented themselves with, okay, we've got this new religion, everyone needs to turn to it, and people are just going to say, get out of here, get out of
Right.
town.
Yeah.
But if they say no, this is the original, this is authentic, it's old, it predates all the others, then they have a sense of authority and purpose, and that's why he believes that the history was falsified.
Okay.
There's also another idea that Johnson does not get into, but there's evidence first presented by Immanuel Velikovsky that the ancient world around the Bronze Age, there was an event that caused chaos, catastrophe across the ancient world. We don't really know the date of this, but there's different dates being put forward, and some as recent as the 14th century, and that is evident in the Black Plague. And if you remember, we did a talk recently about how the conditions of the oceans changed from the 1400s.
Yes.
So that also might be an effect from this event. Then there is also a more recent group following on from the works of Immanuel Velikovsky, and they're called the Thunderbolts Project. They're exploring the electric universe theory. Now, they have put together a theory that the planet Earth and the nearby planets have come into their current orbits in recent memory. So it didn't happen billions and millions of years ago. It happened thousands of years ago within, human memory. And a lot of the religions that have been created in the ancient world were people trying to describe what they were seeing in the skies. And this is where you get the planets associated with the gods and the thunderbolts. And the thunderbolts was just plasma lighting, hitting the earth, creating all this catastrophe. And the story of, the flood story, for instance, Noah's Ark, was all written, it was recorded because the people were experiencing these celestial events that were creating havoc and chaos. The human race almost died out, basically, from this event. But Johnson doesn't talk about this. I brought this up because that might be another reason why they falsified our chronology. And maybe they wanted to hide this event and say, oh, no, that happened thousands of years ago. In actual fact, that happened a lot, closer to our time.
Yep.
Now, the reason they might falsify something like that or hide it is because maybe the event comes around every so often and they don't want us to know about that. That might be one reason. The other reason is, like we touched on, about Christianity probably came out of that event as the new religion as well. So they're just some things to think about.
Can you maybe help us understand, in terms of the history and the literature that we have, there are obviously few texts, original texts that exist. You believe that most of those are copies, is that right?
Well, see, that's another thing. Looking into ancient texts, I found, and other researchers have come to this conclusion, that we have very few original copies. We don't have many original texts that are copies, and a lot of them are copies of copies of copies. So they say, the oldest copy is the Greek copy, and then they date it to a certain date. Then there's this line of thinking that a lot of people say, no, all these so-called ancient Greek and Roman texts, Latin texts, were created in the Middle Ages with the Renaissance. And then they're antedated with using, they could do that using old ink. And then we come on to, carbon-14 dating where people say, oh, yeah, but it's dated to such and such,
Sure.
The mainstream researchers bring this up all the time. Okay, now, what I found is with carbon-14 dating, if there was a celestial event where if we were hit with plasma, for instance, or a lightning show a certain period of time, it affects the readout of the carbon-14 dating. So maybe something that, you've dated to 5,000 years ago is actually only, 500 years ago, because what's happened in the skies and on the earth with this lighting has affected the reading.
Yeah.
Right. This is where they get those crazy. This is where I reckon they get those crazy readings of millions of years ago for ridiculous rock or a stone, or they find an axe in some kind of rock and they date it to 1,000,000 years ago, and it's like an axe, and you go, no, that doesn't make any sense, because obviously the carbon-14 dating isn't accurate. There's something wrong with it.
So they're rewriting history. But I'd like to direct you to a quote that you briefly touched on, which was actually from another article called "The Noble Ones." And if you can allow me to read this, and I'd like your feedback on this. When you mention around the the early Greek and Roman
Bronze
times,
Age. Yeah.
the Bronze Age. This was a time of widespread societal collapse associated with environmental change, mass migration, and the destruction of cities. The economies of the Mycenaean Greece and Anatolia disintegrated, transforming those civilizations into small, isolated village cultures and ushering in the Greek Dark Ages. Some historians have described the collapse as arguably the worst disaster in ancient history.
Yeah, that is a quote, like you said, from another article, but it's good that you brought that up because it's relevant to this topic. See, a lot of researchers don't know what happened during that period. After this is when you see the sea peoples, and they talk about the sea peoples coming over and taking over, and because a lot of the great civilizations were weakened by this event, and then
The sea peoples you refer to, the merchants, as we've already discussed.
well, yeah,
Could be.
or
Are you talking about
yes.
something much bigger than that, or?
No, I guess that's another topic. The
Mm.
sea peoples were probably hired, let's say, hired by the merchants, because they were known to hire mercenaries. So they probably
Right.
saw an
Okay.
opportunity to attack these civilizations while they were
Okay.
already in chaos.
Okay.
But what this is saying basically is that something happened during that period. And this is probably when you see a lot of that area of Anatolia, which was rich in high civilization, disappear. And then it moves on to the West, into Europe, basically
Right.
from there, because they were devastated. Something happened that just wiped them off the map,
Right.
basically. So this is where I think it's the same event, is celestial event. But when I say the same event, okay, now this is something that I had a hard time understanding. It's not one event and that's it. It happens once. It was concurrently. So it probably happened once and then 50 years later it got hit again,
Right.
20 years later again. The planets or something like a comet trying to get its orbit stable. While it was doing that, it was getting really close to the Earth or hitting the Earth, or remnants of it were hitting the Earth. And I think something similar also happened to the Roman Empire and
Mm.
probably caused it to almost collapse as well. But it didn't collapse at that time, but it almost did.
And we'll get to that in a moment. But why, in your opinion, do you think that they wanted to mask or change the dates of a catastrophe or these catastrophes, as you say? And I know that you mentioned the Thunderbolt project earlier. Can you maybe
Oh,
talk
yeah.
a little bit about that?
I think we did touch on this where I said if they believed that it was an event that would come about every so often, they've got the power to prepare or know when it was going to happen again. Or now there is this alternative community, theory that, yeah, catastrophes happen every so often. A new one's coming, prepare, build your bunker. There's all those preppers and all that. Or they read into the Bible somehow that something's going to come again and we're going to get, wiped off the planet and, you better prepare for it. People at the Thunderbolts Project, and I sort of agree with their research on this, is that it happened and it happened once. And that kind of catastrophe is not going to happen again because it was, like they said, it was the comet or the planets stabilizing and now they're set in their current orbits. The only thing that will change that is if something from outside the solar system came in and caused chaos, that way knocked something out. So, yeah, I don't believe that something else is about to happen. I don't believe that. But yeah, that might be one of the reasons they changed the dates. Then Johnson believes it was to mask the rise of Christianity, basically.
Let's maybe get back on track and talk about what we're here to talk about. And I know we have to build a reference point of history to get there. So what do you think is the link between, say, Rome and Christianity? Can we maybe start on that?
This is something that has always bothered me, even from when I was quite young, before I had done any research into anything really. I noticed, and there was some historians have also noticed, that the decline of the Roman imperial authority, so, the Senate and the power base, coincides with the rise of the popes. And they almost happen, almost this sort of friendly transfer of power. It's not like the Christians overtook the Romans, beat them, and we're now in charge. It was just like,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, we'll hand you the power, or, there was no fight. This is the Roman Empire we're talking about, the most powerful military
In the world,
in the
ever.
world ever, probably. And it's
Yeah.
like Christians are trying to tell me this is their idea that, the power of Jesus filled the heart of the emperor. And, now he's just, he saw God, he saw a vision. And
Mm,
now I'm going to give, as the emperor, the all powerful, who was seen as a god and worshipped as a god
that's right.
himself, all of a sudden he's saying, no, all right, I'm going to give away all my power. What I was doing was wrong. As if all the Roman nobility, the power base just sort of gave it all away. That's like saying Trump or Elon Musk or whoever, Rockefeller, Rothschilds, just say, you know what?
I'm bored of this.
You know what I mean? I'm just going to give away all my power, and
Yeah.
here you
It's
guys, we're going to give it
crazy.
all to the church, and come on, people.
I know it's crazy that people would believe that.
But see, this is the thing. One of the things that has always interested me and why I wrote my book to begin with was the human behavior, human thinking. We're not that different to our ancestors. They're not going to do stupid things that we wouldn't do today. Okay. They're not going to do that. You wouldn't do it today. You wouldn't see the power base do that today. The rulers of the world are not going to do that. They wouldn't have done it then.
Mm.
So what I
So,
feel is they just transferred the power and the titles from the Roman Senate to what we call the Catholic Church,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they just sort of just said, okay, now we're going to be these guys,
Yeah.
rebranded basically. Okay.
Essentially.
Then you've got these Protestants that say, yeah, but that's true. What I'm saying is true. The Catholic Church sort of took Christianity that it was already in existence and corrupted it and made it into this big power base, the Catholic Church. And it's not the true teaching. It's not what Jesus wanted or the followers wanted. And I say, and Johnson says, no, there was no Christianity before the Christian Church. Okay? None. It didn't exist. Zero.
Mm.
The,
Mm.
the Catholic Church, the Romans gave it to you.
Yeah.
Anything before that is antedated. Okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so this is the big split between, this is what Christians argue. So they see my point and say, yeah, no, that's true that, the Romans gave us that, but they adapted Christianity that was in existence. And
Mm.
none of that happened with throwing the Christians to the lions and all that bullshit, the catacombs. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just to martyr these people. There were other religions which were amalgamated into Christianity. There was Mithra and other Persian,
Yeah. Which you've mentioned before.
Zoroaster, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and if you look at Christianity, it has borrowed from all of these ancient religions, just as much as Judaism has. Christianity borrowed from a lot of older religions, but what people need to understand is there's nothing bad about that. And I don't have this negative feeling towards Christianity because maybe there was a good reason for it. See, now, if the empire was in chaos and it was a big empire with different cultures, different peoples, they would have had their own different religions. This would have been a way to unify them, and it would make them stronger too. And it would make them stronger against other religions like Islam, who are a unified people and culture and religion, or Judaism, who, Johnson says saw them as a threat. So, in order to unify the people and make it stronger, they thought, let's bring this all under one umbrella, and these are the rules, set out some new rules, and this is what the new religion will be. And that's what, the Catholic Church, Catholic means universal. I mean, it's all there. They tell you in the words. And as a consequence, it has made Europe stronger. It made them dominate the world. The idea was a good one. It worked.
Okay. Well, this is a good little segue into, I guess, the crux of what we're talking about today. And I guess going on from what you've just said, one of the clues that you look at in your article is this Latin title and phrase that we've all seen at some point, S.P.Q.R.
Yeah, to try and prove the false antiquity of ancient Rome, and as Johnson was saying, that we're not that far removed from the Greeks and Romans. What evidence is there? What proof is there? And like you said, one of these phrases that I've seen everywhere around the world, and even associated with places that weren't connected to the ancient Roman Empire.
Mm.
So I went looking for that. It was another researcher that alerted me to this in an article that he had written, and I linked that in my article. I found an interesting old illustration from 1829 from London, and the image is of a dinner for the Lord Mayor of the City of London. And in this image, there's two flags in the background with the letters S.P.Q.R on them, right?
L.
L, so
Oh,
obviously
okay.
referring to the Senate and people of London, right?
Uh-huh.
Why else would they have the L there and the dinners in London? And I was thinking, but
Okay.
why would they still use that phrase? I mean, if it had died 1,000 years prior to this, why would it still be in use? You wouldn't use it. You'd be completely forgotten about.
Can I just maybe interrupt there just for a moment and just for the benefit of our listeners, explain, I guess, the meaning behind SPQR before we go on,
Yep.
because I know that you're going to dive deep into this, and this is going to be the guts of what we're talking about. So for those people, they've probably seen the title in movies like Ridley Scott's Gladiator, for example. That was obviously a classic. It was ancient Rome, and if you've ever walked around Rome, and I was there last week, a lot of the older structures that you walk by, there's the inscription SPQR, which is everywhere. What I noticed is that people were walking around without taking much notice. You're in centuries of history, and yet people, if you stop them in the street and you ask them what it means, maybe the Italians would know, but tourists, they wouldn't have a clue. Anyway, the acronym is for the Latin phrase Senatus Populusque Romanus, which translates into modern day English as the Senate and the people of Rome, like you mentioned earlier with the London and the Lord Mayor scenario. And the phrase was referring to the government of the ancient Roman Republic, which later
Yeah.
became the Roman Empire, as you know. And so the abbreviation was then used on coins, inscriptions, documents to signify, I guess, the collective the government of Rome and by the Senate and its citizens. And it basically symbolised legal and political authority, essentially. Today, it's still, as I mentioned earlier, it still remains a symbol of the city of Rome. And one thing I found, and maybe you can help me understand this, I actually saw it on manhole covers. Like, is there any relevance to that? Because that's something that I'd like your feedback on.
Yeah, so like you were saying, it refers to the ancient Roman government or the Senate, right? So then it sort of disappears, they say, with the fall of Rome, but then it's renewed in the Middle Ages and it's used again by the city of Rome, just the city. But I mean, by that point, the city of Rome is a shadow of its former self. It doesn't have power. It's just so they just use it for, like the Comuni would use their own little symbol. And the reason you see it on manholes and that is because when Mussolini came to power, he wanted to revive that phrase and the importance of it and the symbolism behind it and sort of connect modern Italy to ancient Rome. I mean, people don't know this. He wanted to reintroduce Latin as well, so that's why you see it on the manhole. And he tried to bring back Greco-Roman architecture, and then you see that in the buildings built around the 1940s, 30s, and
they demonise this man because of his beliefs on fascism, etc. Which again, that was our last podcast.
Yeah, people can refer to that. Yeah.
Well, I think people should refer to that because that's one of our other most interesting discussions about fascism and what it means. And they can go to your Substack channel at phoenicianhunter.substack.com. They can listen to the entirety, or they can go to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/369 Lumineer.
My thoughts were, if we go by Johnson's theory that, if we remove 700 to 1,000 years, then, the S.P.Q.R. and its variants that were applied around the world, it brings them up right into the modern era. So it's like, so they would have used it right up into the modern era. So is there evidence of this, that this is the case? And, in Wikipedia, they refer to it as the S.P.Q.R. template. No, sorry, S.P.Q.X. template. So they removed the word R and substitute it with X. Well,
yes,
the X refers to the city that is applying that phrase.
Okay.
So the X will be replaced with the city of whoever's using it.
Like you mentioned earlier, S.P.Q.L,
exactly.
London Lord Mayor.
So the examples I found were all varying dates. So I found, S.P.Q.S, which referred to Siena, and that was a plaque that was on a wall dated to the 14th to 16th century, so quite recent.
Okay.
S.P.Q.L, which was in Liverpool. I mean, in a building that was built in the 1800s, so, okay, but why are they still using this phrase? Why are they still connecting to this ancient Roman Senate? And then there was another one in Germany, in Hamburg, in the Hamburg City Hall, again, built in the late 1800s. And then I found them in book references. I mean, there's so many mentioned in books. And I'll just read out a few. The Senate and People of Naples, of Dublin, Paris, and the Senate and People of Mexico City. Now, that might sound strange, but it's like, what the hell does Mexico got to do with Rome? But don't forget that Mexico was colonized by the Spanish, and the Spanish were under the authority of the Pope. So, okay, so then, that's your connection with the Pope and ancient Rome.
I wish people could actually see us, because the way you just you spoke all that, you were looking me straight in the eye and with conviction, and your knowledge is unbelievable. And again, I encourage people to read your articles. But so what do you think all this means? What is the significance of the phrase SPQ and then X, let's say?
So what I think, if we go back to the beginning, so we have to understand Rome and how it developed. So Rome started to expand after the founding of the Roman Republic, they say around 500 BC, all right?
Mm.
So, but what people don't understand, it wasn't a nation the way we think of a nation today. Roman Republic or the extended Roman Empire wasn't one people, one culture, one language, one government, one religion.
That's interesting you should say that because, again, you've detailed this in your article where there's a section that you say, the Republic was not a nation state in the modern sense, but a network of self-ruled towns with varying degrees of independence from the Senate and provinces administered by military commanders. It was governed by annually elected magistrates, Roman consuls above all, as we know, in conjunction with the Senate.
Yeah, so S.P.Q.R. simply referred to the administrative center, like the government, for this multi-nation groups of towns or confederacy, right?
Yep.
So, and the headquarters were in the city of Rome. So my guess is this, the reason they use this SPQ and then X, wherever the town is because it represents their membership into this union. Right. And it's no different to the way the EU works today, okay?
Yeah.
So in most government buildings, you have the flag of that nation. So you're in Italy, you've got the Italian flag, and next to it, you've got what? Another flag for the EU.
EU flag, the European Union flag.
Right, it's exactly the same thing. So, in London, for instance, they have their own colors and their own flag, and then they have the SPQL referencing that they belong to this union. Right. All right. Or this, yeah. Okay. So like to the ancient EU, for instance.
And you also mention that, and this is probably going to the next step, that the emperor became the pope. So, and this is why a lot of people say that, the Roman Empire didn't fall, it became the Vatican City, etc. I found this quite fascinating, right? So maybe tell us what's happened here.
I almost find it unbelievable that people don't see it as clearly as I do. Mm-hmm. Right. So like, we touched on this earlier, that there's a point where the Roman Senate becomes the papacy almost overnight. Okay?
And do we know roughly when?
Just before the fall of the Roman Empire. I think they give it, 400, 500 AD.
AD, yep.
Yeah, right. Okay. But again, we can't rely on their dates too much. It was like Johnson said, a lot of it has been falsified. So, bloody who knows?
History is a set of lies agreed upon as attributed to Napoleon, as we know.
Your favorite quote.
It is good.
It's becoming. Okay, so there was. So I looked into this, and I'm looking at the names. And words are very important. So the Roman Senate became the Roman Curia, also known as the Court of Rome. So this is what the Catholic Church calls. They call it the Roman Curia. Is their pontiffs, their bishops, and who decide on certain matters within the church, right? Mm. So it performs a similar role within the Catholic Church that it did in the Senate. What I found also was in ancient Rome, the word curia meant the place of assembly for the Roman Senate. So the Catholic Church has just adopted the same name. Instead of using the name Roman Senate, they're calling it the Roman Curia, which means the same thing. So the Catholic bishops replaced the old Roman consuls, who were the ones that were, sent to these towns to help administer the government there. And they continued to be the eyes and ears of the emperor, or the eyes and ears, in this case, of the Pope. So, and then the emperor assumes the title of Supreme Pontiff. And he is referred to that is still a term that the Pope, is still a title that is attributed
Pontiff.
To the Pope.
That's right. You've heard
Supreme
people
Pontiff.
refer to him. That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, they haven't changed. The wording is the same. So what people need to realize is that the Pontifex Maximus in ancient Rome was referred to the chief high priest of the College of Pontiffs. But what people need to realize is that role was held by the emperor.
Right.
So the emperor was the high priest. So what's changed? Nothing. So now the Pope is the high priest. So instead of calling himself, he just no longer calls himself the emperor, but he still calls himself, the Roman Pontiff or the Supreme Pontiff.
It's amazing when you articulate it like you have, and to think back of even commentary on television, if it's talking about the Pope, a lot of times they refer to him as the Pontiff.
Yeah, so people, they just forget that title.
They forget it. That's right.
They haven't changed their names. They haven't changed their titles. Mm-hmm. This is what people don't understand. But then again, I go back to what I mentioned earlier, and a lot of Christians say, yeah, but that's exactly what happened. But Christianity existed before, and they don't separate the two. No, they didn't. It didn't exist before. The Roman Empire gave you Christianity. Okay,
so they
very important.
They basically haven't bothered to change titles. That's
No.
I guess that's the biggest ruse. So what you're proposing, and let me get this straight, and if you're proposing this, then I agree with you wholeheartedly, is that the Roman Empire simply became the Christian Empire, or what we know as the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah, and this is evident through what happened with Europe. And I'm not saying everyone went along with it, because obviously not everyone did go along with it. And this is where you had conflicts, and you had, some sovereigns and monarchs saying, I'm not going along with this, and then the church going in there and saying, well, you either accept this or we're going to wipe you off the the face of the map. And this is where you get all those wars, the religious wars, and leading up to the 1500s with the Protestant Reformation. And so this wasn't settled until recent times, because not everyone accepted the authority of the Pope. But that's a topic for another article, another time. And
Yeah.
I've touched on Christianity in other articles as well. So people who jump on my Substack, there's a lot there on Christianity as well, because it's an important part of this discussion.
course.
And I'll just say this, that Christianity was also a commercial enterprise. This is something people need to understand. So was Islam, and so was Judaism. All three, to a certain degree, were commercial enterprises. And why not? They're a corporation. Like I said, they became a corporation. So this is what I think I mentioned in the article as well, that eventually this republic to empire to Catholic Church becomes a corporation, because any kind of group of persons held together in kind of unison is sort of a corporation at the end of the day. Okay. So it becomes this corporation, and that corporation becomes a commercial enterprise. In order for you to trade with them, you have to become part of the corporation as well. So you have to become Christian. And that's where a lot of, the pagan cultures of Europe became Christian. They didn't become Christian because they were forced to, or they were, people believe that the Vikings just put down their swords. I mean, these people were the strongest, most feared people in Europe.
Most brutal as well.
And, mainstream historians and a lot of people believe, and again, Christians, the power of Jesus and God.
They gave up.
They saw the light and the love,
Yeah.
and they put down their axes
Oh,
and said,
gosh.
okay, I'm Christian now. No, it's not what happened. What happened, and this is in another article, which I call The Rise of Christianity, and we'll just touch on it here because it's relevant.
Of course.
They basically said they cut off everyone who wasn't a part of this confederacy and said, if you want to trade with us, then you have to become part of this confederacy. You have to become Christian or part of this, the S.P.Q.R. Like basically, it's exactly the way the EU operates today, right? So if you're part of the EU, you get special, you don't have to pay tariffs and certain, things that you do. You don't if you're part of the EU. So it worked exactly the same way. If you want to trade with us, you've got to be part of this union. Okay. And that's why the Scandinavian nations became Christian. That was done by the sovereign, not by the people. The people didn't say, I want to become Christian now.
Yeah.
Because now I believe in Jesus and I don't believe in my ancestors' gods.
Yeah.
Just look at human behavior and human thinking. You wouldn't do that today. I mean, how many people do Jehovah's Witnesses convert? I don't know. They come knocking on your door. Do they convert anyone? Do they really?
Again, I'm not deep into that, but I would suggest that they don't convert many.
The success rate would be very low, I would say.
Very low. Yeah.
That's not the way you convert people. You don't convert people, that way. It's usually through monetary reasons.
Yeah.
That's the way you convert people. Okay.
So what's the reference to the Byzantine Empire or the Roman Empire like?
Okay, so historians then split the so-called Roman Empire into three different time periods or entities. So you've got, the old Roman Republic Empire entity, and then you've got the Byzantine Empire period to the 1400s, and then you've got the Holy Roman Empire that sort of lasted until
1800s.
the modern era, the beginning of the modern era, the 1800s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the way I view these is they were still under that one corporate entity. They were just sort of like three different headquarters, I guess. The way you have a Coca-Cola's got headquarters in America, they've got an EU headquarters, and then they've probably got one in Asia.
Yeah, okay.
This is what's going on. So then I looked into these, again, words, all right? The Byzantine Empire was coined in the 1400s after the collapse of the empire, right? They themselves referred to themselves as Romans. And as their emperor was known as the Emperor of the Romans. And their capital was called New Rome.
Oh,
Okay?
wow. Okay.
So all these names and titles were given afterwards.
Sure.
Okay, maybe to mask what the hell was going on. I don't
Of
know.
course.
I've got a whole section on the Holy Roman Empire as well. The emperor there needed to be crowned by the Pope. He had to be sanctioned by the Pope.
Yeah.
So again, it's all connected to the Catholic Church at this point, which is, the remnants of the old Roman Empire. So this whole entity, this corporation, the demise is very slow. It's not that it collapses overnight. So you've got the western part that collapses slowly, and then the Byzantine arm of it collapses in the 1400s with the Turks, the invasion of the Turks, and then the Holy Roman Empire is dissolved by Napoleon Bonaparte in 1806. Okay,
It's that recent. So people
yeah.
think the
So this
Roman
is why I said
yeah.
it brings it up. Like Johnson said, we're not that far removed.
What people understand is that we've gone from the Sumerians to the ancient Egyptians to they fell, to the Greeks, they fell, to the Romans, they fell, and then it went on from there. But in actual fact, what you're saying and what you've proven is that it's actually come to recent times, as recent as I said, a couple of centuries ago, around
Yeah.
1800.
So Johnson is right. We're not that far removed. So then, I touch on this in another article, and I'll repeat myself that they're all connected. Okay. So this is one big story that I'm trying to tell, that this is the time, the 1800s, where you start seeing Britain becoming the world's superpower. Okay.
Yep.
And they put the final nail in the coffin of this Roman corporation with the unifying of Italy.
Yes. 1861.
Yeah, I've written an article on that called "The City Takes Rome," and I think we've done a podcast on that.
We have done a podcast, yes.
So yeah, the city of London are behind that. The fall of the papacy there, where the Pope becomes a prisoner in the Vatican, and that to me is the final nail. That's when they lose most of their power. Okay, there are a lot of people say, the Vatican still runs the world, or it's the Jesuits, or it's the Jews, or it's the British, and it's whatever. And all these people just sort of fixate on one entity as the sole rulers of the world. It's just like, why can't there be more than? I mean, is that how the mafia works? Is there just one mafia that runs everything, or do you have competing mafia factions and families? And it's exactly like that,
You just go
People have
watch
this
it.
fantasy. I don't know. They create these fantasy where it's just one bad guy and that's it, because they have to validate that they're on the good guy's side or something.
Yep,
Why can't it
yep,
be? Why can't it be more than one fighting for power?
I think this is it's great to actually finish up on the City of London. And as I said, and as you said, we've done a podcast on this, and people should go back and either through your Substack or through the Lumineer YouTube channel and listen to those. I encourage them to do it because it'll all start to make sense. And as you've said in the past, is that your research is interconnected. So you're trying to tell a story. And each article that you write, very well researched, mind you, tells a story. And this has been probably one of my favourites, only because of my exposure to S.P.Q.R. and to Rome. But before, we're running out of time. Are there any final words that you want to convey to our audience?
Yeah, I just want to mention something that isn't in the article, but I do touch on it in other articles, and this may lead to our next podcast, okay? And I know you're fascinated with maritime law, right? So this is where I believe that maritime law comes out of too, this corporation, this entity. This entity starts applying laws to land and sea. So you've got the one religion, then you need what? You need commerce to be under the one umbrella to, you need the one monetary system, and you need the laws of the land, you need the laws of the sea. Now, what people need to understand is that perhaps, it was a good thing that they did. If it's true that there was, a disaster, a celestial disaster, catastrophe, or a series, someone needs to rebuild civilization. And I think that's what happened around this time. Okay, so they needed to rebuild it. And someone needs to take or assume responsibility for mankind. If you assume responsibility, what are you doing? You're taking ownership. So the Pope, therefore, or the Emperor takes ownership.
Yep.
Now, this is where we get into, commercial law, okay?
Yep.
And I know you've got some interesting things to say about this.
Oh, I've got a lot to say about it, which we won't go into today. But Admiral Trujillo, it's common law and
okay. So, for instance, if someone's taken responsibility and ownership, that means they become the guardians over the earth and the people. Us as people, we have rights of usage only, because you can't own it because it's already been claimed. It's like the father, daddy, he built the house. Everything in the house is his. You can use it, but it remains there. You're not taking it with you. And this philosophy, when you die, you don't take your shit with you anyway.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some kind of lesson they want you to depart as well, for us to learn some kind of lesson. People are going to get angry with me saying that, but because people like to own things. So this is why when you go to court, what it really is you're making a counterclaim.
Correct.
Okay, so you go to court to make a counterclaim because it's already owned. So if you're always going to lose in that way. You're always going to lose that case, okay? Because what I said before is it's already been claimed. What you need to do, or what you can do, is say you have right of usage. You're using it. You're not claiming shit, okay? Let someone else have that responsibility. Why would you want that? With ownership comes responsibility. Someone's already done that for you. So enjoy the fruits of, usage, basically.
Yes.
Now, people are going to say to me, now this is connected to socialism as well. Now people say, oh, you're a communist. You sounds like a,
It's all about creating discourse and creating discussion around ideas, and this is what we do.
Trying to make you think.
That's all right. That's all right. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make people just delve a little bit deeper. So, in closing, and look, I would love to take you up on that offer for us to talk about admiralty law and common law and straw man and the definition of court and how the system works. That would be a great discussion, and I invite our listeners to probably make suggestions as to what they would like to hear in that. But as far as the Roman Empire is concerned, and this has been the crux of what we've been talking about, it has fallen or it has taken on a rebranded identity. That's essentially what we've been talking about, correct?
Yeah, exactly. The Catholic Church, but then that was superseded by the British Empire, and people like to say that no, the Vatican still runs everything, because I had some guy say, because of a treaty that they signed in 1200 AD. Okay, so everything that happened after that, when the king left the Catholic faith and started his own church, and all the wars that happened after that, and everything else that had happened 800 years don't mean anything. No, that's all smoke and mirrors, they say. It's all just make believe. People just died for no reason. It was almost like they did it for entertainment purposes because they signed something 1200
supposedly.
So who cares? Who cares?
Yeah. Can I ask you a question before we do sign off? Do you think that we are seeing a transition at the moment between City of London and the US?
Well, no, because I see them as one entity.
And I just wanted you to say that verbally because we have discussed it, and they're all part of that one conglomerate, let's call it.
Yeah, read the Pilgrim Society
That's right,
article I've got.
Well, in fact, listen to our podcast on the Pilgrim Society. And
exactly.
Should make it a lot easier. Well, look, Phoenician Hunter, that was enthralling. Again, your research is amazing. Just a reminder to listeners that they can go and read your articles. There are a lot of free articles on there, but it's also by subscription, which you get a lot more at phoenicianhunter.substack.com. You can listen to the podcast there. You can also listen to the podcast and learn a little bit more about other bits of history on youtube.com at 369 Lumineer. So thanks again, Phoenician Hunter. I genuinely look forward to our next chat, whatever that may be. And once again, thanks for your time.
Thank you. And I just wanted to mention that we do these fortnightly, but we're going to try and do these weekly.
Good point.
Time permitting, both of us are busy with other things.
Other ventures, yep. Suffice to say that we'll be going from fortnightly to weekly. So we encourage people to subscribe, to follow us on YouTube, to follow us on Substack. And
we really need your support for, to sort of maintain that level. The more you support us, the more we can produce, basically. So, yeah.
Great point. Well, thanks again. Look forward to our chat next week. And in the meantime, happy reading, happy listening, and stay well.